There was a particular comment that I received in the comments section of a video by Wolfman's Got Nards. It was his Halloween 2018 Trailer 2 US version reaction, in which Andy wrote, "As a two-hander with Halloween 1978, there will be no point in keeping Michael in the shadows, as that build-up was already done back then. And once Michael came into plain view in that movie, we all saw what he was capable of. You never really got a good glimpse of the Shape's mask until late in Halloween 1978. All the shots you mentioned were either fleeting, distant, cropped by the frame, composition through condensed up car windows, etc. And once the cat is out of the bag, it's pointless now to put him back in the shadows and do the same shtick again." So I wanted to talk about that shtick that Andy was essentially arguing against, the putting of Myers back in the shadows, and for that matter, putting anything back in the shadows after you've seen it. For instance, in a different horror franchise, Alien, you see the alien creature more and more towards the end of the film, until being launched out of the airlock by Ripley's harpoon gun, we see it in full view. When this happens, one could certainly make the argument that it is pointless to put it back in the shadows, because we've seen it from head to toe. We know what it looks like, and why bother? Now, in that particular instance, of course, Alien had an undetermined life cycle. It wasn't until James Cameron came along and did Aliens where they established something a little bit more canonical. The point is, James Cameron's treatment of the creature, the life cycle was cemented, and you were dealing with a creature that had a set shape. So once you saw the creature and what it looked like, it wasn't going to change. You had effectively a caste system. You had the chest burster, you had the face hugger, the warrior alien, and the queen. And when you saw them on screen in full view, their shape wasn't going to continue to change. Whereas in Alien, one could make the argument that if you saw the alien in full view, that it might not just change shape again. Whereas in Aliens, they stuck to a hierarchy, a life cycle that was set, cut in stone. It had a few surprises up its sleeve, and I think there are certain things that worked quite well. And these involve keeping the creature hidden even after you've exposed it. And that's what I wanted to talk about here, is the idea that with the cat effectively out of the bag in Aliens, it doesn't always stay out of the bag. There are moments where, despite having seen the creature, and once you see it, you know exactly what it looks like, there isn't a warrior alien that you see later in the film that looks different than a warrior alien earlier in the film. When they're underneath the atmospheric processors in that movie and they're blowing aliens apart with their smart guns, those aliens that they're killing, or the aliens that are killing them, look the same as they do at the end of the film when Ripley meets the Queen for the first time. We see pretty much all there is to see in regards to the Queen's arsenal, her weaponry, the warrior aliens. And yet, this doesn't stop James Cameron from having scenes in his film where the creatures attack from hiding. They generally don't just walk up to you and attack you. In fact, they never do. When the pilot, Pharaoh, is killed, the alien sneaks up behind her. We don't see the alien who is delivering the killing blow until right before the strike. The co-pilot is killed off screen. If you watch the director's cut of the film, we generally don't see the aliens as they're rushing in to attack. Now, if the cat was out of the bag and that meant not putting it back in and that you should just keep things in plain view at all times, we should, during these tunnel sequences where the sentry guns are holding off the alien attack, James Cameron should have shot it in such a way that the aliens were visible while being shot at. Point in fact, he didn't While the guns are firing and while the Marines are watching the ammo counters go, you really don't see what they're shooting at. Even though it's a direct frontline assault, it would be a forlorn hope in military terms. Essentially a suicide attack where the Queen is throwing her superior numbers at this smaller, better armed fort. She's essentially trying to overcome them through brute force. And yet you never see the enforcers for this strategic maneuver. You really only hear them. You can hear them screaming non-stop as they're being shot.
D-gun's down 50%. C-gun's right behind it.
Or as they move away from the defended corridors and they're trying to find other ways inside the compound.
They're at the pressure door.
Man, listen to that.
And that is a very effective technique, using sound. Sound in the place of sight, where things are hidden, but you can still hear them. You go all the way back to The Castle of Otranto by Horace Walpole, or Anne Radcliffe's The Mysteries of Udolpho, and you have characters inside the walls of a castle. You have false walls or fake walls, and behind those are characters that are projecting their voices outward to terrify the characters in the story, and by extension, the audience. It's a very old technique, and one that is utilized when the object of fear is hidden. They call it terror. The idea that you can't see what's scaring you. It's a terrifying thing, whereas to horrify would be to have the thing directly in front of you. You can see it, and it annihilates your ability to imagine it. Imagining something causes it to expand in your mind, which is the technique that they primarily used in Alien. It's also the technique that they used in Halloween. There are more examples, though, in Aliens of terror, keeping the monster hidden. When the Marines are surrounded, it's a last stand. They weld the doors shut, and they have the motion trackers going. The motion trackers are actually a kind of curtain, because when you look at them, what do you see? You see effectively a blank two-dimensional screen with blips on it. Not that different from looking at a curtain and knowing that something's beyond it, and all you can see is a shadow or a shape. It's the same technique that they used in Alien when Captain Dallas is killed. It's the same technique that they used in The Thing from Another World, the 1950s Howard Hawks film. They had motion trackers in that. They had motion trackers in other films besides.
What?
It just stopped at the foot of the pass.
Are you sure you've got a real blip there?
Big as a house, sir, and we were dead on target with both bursts. It's coming on again.
Straight across?
It shows here. It's still coming.
Where the thing that you're looking at is reduced to a basic kind of shape. In John Carpenter's The Thing, when he's looking at the screen and watching the cells divide, and the rogue cell takes over the parent cell and copies it. It's a similar kind of idea. A metonymy of something basic representing something more complex, more dangerous. That isn't it, not the way that we would normally see it. So these cells on Doc's model are the thing at a cellular level, but we don't see it at a cellular level. We see it at a more advanced level when it's mimicking an organism like a dog or a human. But we associate the thing that we do see with the thing that we don't, the thing that is just kind of a shape or a shadow of what we're afraid of actually meeting face to face, because we're not going to meet a cell face to face in the same sense that we're not going to meet a blip on a motion tracker face to face. It's what's beyond that that terrifies us. And that's what happens in Aliens, when the aliens are going through the Marines' defenses and they're confused and they realize that the aliens are in the ceiling, but on the motion tracker it appears as though they're passing through the walls like ghosts. Those blips on the screen are ghost-like, they're shadowy. But the effect is a terrifying one because the alien is hidden. What they see is clouding their view. in a way that hides something terrifying beyond it. That's what terror is all about. You use the darkness to hide something inside of or beyond the darkness that you know is dangerous, that you know is there, and it causes your imagination to go crazy. And that's what happens with the aliens in the ceiling. You know that they're in the ceiling, but you can't see them directly. They're beyond that barrier. The ceiling panels are between you as an audience and the aliens beyond. The only indicator that you have is the motion tracker and those ghostly blips. The ghosts don't have to be literal. They can also just be an extension of something else, or a shadow of something. So it all goes back to the idea of shadow play, a phantasmagoria, where you just have shadows on a wall. And what you're seeing when you look at a shadow, you're not seeing the thing itself, you're seeing an extension of it, a metonymy. It's indicative of it, but it's also indicative of it as hidden. And that's exactly what's happening with the motion trackers, where you know that something is near, but it's hidden. And it causes your mind to expand. And this is a technique that James Cameron used in that film. And there are scenes after the aliens burst from the ceiling above and into the room where there is plenty of shooting, and you do see the aliens in plain sight, but not nearly to the extent that you would have in many other films. You don't really see as much of the creatures as you might think. Again, it's quick, flashing shots of them being wounded as the Marines fight their way out. But even then, much of it, say when Hudson is killed and the alien grabs him and pulls him down into the earth, you don't see the creature that's pulling him down. You see its hand pulling him to his doom, but you don't see the creature itself. The most that you see of any of the xenomorphs during that scene is when Vasquez dies. She pins its head against the wall and shoots it until it dies. By the time Ripley decides to be an action hero, then James Cameron turns it into a shooting gallery where the aliens are never hidden at all and they just pop out in front of her. At that point in the movie, the aliens are effectively just cannon fodder for the unstoppable Ripley, but there's something else. It's the same principle that I was talking about earlier, where they're a fragment of something larger. So, whereas before you had the blips on the motion tracker, which were representative of something beyond those blips, now the aliens are fragments of something beyond themselves. It depends which version of the movie you watch, because in the theatrical version of the film, you don't know about the Queen at all. It's just presumed that the aliens multiply and divide in a way that is left to the viewer's imagination. Whereas in the director's cut of the film, there's a scene that they include where something is laying these eggs. And they even say that in the film, a queen.
There's like one female that runs the whole show.
Yes, the Queen.
She's badass, man. I mean big.
Let's operate under the assumption that someone who saw the director's cut and saw that scene had never seen the movie before. Those viewers would have an idea or inkling that these aliens that Ripley is gunning down, those are shadows or fragments of something bigger than them. Then you have the reveal with the Queen, and you could say that the cat is out of the bag at this point. But it's not exactly, because there are still scenes, even after the Queen is revealed, where Cameron keeps the Queen hidden. I'm not saying he does it entirely, because he doesn't, but there are scenes where it happens. After Ripley kills the rest of the warrior aliens, she lights the eggs on fire, and she destroys the Queen's uterus before fleeing. At this point, there are scenes of terror where you can hear the Queen. You can't see her, but you can only hear her scream. And these are interspersed between scenes of her detaching herself from her destroyed uterus. She is kept hidden. And when Ripley is trying to get the elevator to work, and she hears the Queen screaming, and she looks, but we don't see the Queen. We only hear the Queen, and we know that she's near. That's a technique where they keep the monster hidden. The biggest, baddest monster of them all. And yet, we know what it looks like, but Cameron keeps the queen hidden. They make the escape from the planet. The colony is vaporized by the ensuing explosion of the fusion reactor melting down. They make it on board the Sulaco and everything seems fine, right? Well, the queen is revealed to have been a stowaway on board their craft by having it blend into the ship that the hero used to escape. This is a direct repeat in a movie that has a reputation for showing the creatures, turning them into cannon fodder, and yet it's using techniques that Alien used to keep the monster hidden. We also have a repeat of what Ridley Scott did at the end of Alien by showing the creature in full view and having Ripley and the monster square off. And at this point, it's no longer terrifying. So there you have it. It's entirely possible with a franchise to move back and forth between showing a monster and after you've shown it, going back and using techniques of concealment to keep the monster hidden, to allow your imagination to work. And even though you know exactly what the creature looks like, you can still use techniques like that to make the audience feel suspense, to terrify them. Halloween is no different. It's not a question of to do or not to do, but how well one does it. And that's why Halloween 1 worked as well as it did, because there are plenty of scenes where you see Michael in full view. And Andy says that the shots are fleeting in the distance cropped by the frame, and he's right. But you still see enough of Michael to know what he looks like. It's not as though he's blurred, in the same sense that in 7, you see the killer walking towards one of the detectives. He's just clubbed him, and the killer is approaching him, and it's just a dark shape. You can't see the actor's face. Whereas in Halloween, there are plenty of shots early on in the film where you see enough to know exactly what he looks like. And yeah, they're quick moving, and yeah, they're done really well, but that's not the only reason. It's not the brevity, it's also the fact that the techniques that they use to conceal the shape are effective in their own right, in the same sense that the warrior aliens are still terrifying when they're hidden. You know exactly what they look like. When Michael Myers in Halloween 1978 is concealed, you know exactly what he looks like. You see shots of him early on stalking Laurie. You see his face, you see his mask. You don't even really have to squint. Now granted, they're quick shots, and yes, you don't have a chance to really just stare at him, but you do see him. And if you have a quick eye for it, you are going to see him in full view. Forgetting all of that, there are plenty of shots in Halloween that are effective because you know that the shape is near without actually seeing him, or only seeing parts of him, smaller parts that indicate a larger hidden hole. Even if you know what that hole looks like, the thing that's generated in your imagination is effectively excessive. It's larger than the thing that is actually hidden. That's why it works. It's not that, oh, well, I know what the hidden thing looks like, ergo, my imagination will stop working. No, if you hide something and you already know what it looks like, the technique will still work because your imagination will continue to function. It's why you can go back and watch these films knowing exactly what Myers looks like and still feel terrified because your imagination is continuing to do work even though you know the identity and appearance of the attacker. A lot of people think that at the end of the movie, the killer is decloaked. In Alien, they demask the alien. In Halloween, they demask the alien. In Aliens, they demask the alien. But what do they do? In every sequel, it's the same sort of approach. They build up to the demasking scene. So at the end of one film, it's a demask. The next film doesn't start with the creature in full view like a nature documentary. they're hidden, and they're kept hidden up until a point that you realize that there is something bigger beyond them. I think a problem with the Queen is that they weren't able to really indicate something beyond it, but they didn't have to. If they got rid of the Queen and they just went back to, say, a warrior alien, you're back to the same kind of approach where you know what you're dealing with, and it's just a question of how you reveal it. If your aim is to terrify the audience, then you can do that. But you can also horrify. And the thing from another world walks into the room and starts swinging his hands around. And no slasher that I know of works like that. They always have moments where he attacks from the shadows. I could think of several examples where it's not stealth, but subterfuge or deception. But even so, there's always some form of concealment. Even if the film that preceded it unmasked the creature. And it's no different with Halloween. In Halloween 2, they had a lot of scenes very early on where Michael was walking around. They didn't try to hide him at all. And a lot of the terrifying qualities that Michael had in the first film were gone. Not because we knew what he looked like at the end of the first film, but that from moment to moment we saw him in front of us and there was no attempt to hide him at all. It's not to say that you can't have suspense or tension when something is in front of you and you know it's dangerous, because in The Terminator with James Cameron, it's a good example of that, the tech noir scene. There's no hiding of Schwarzenegger. Even though he's an infiltrator unit, he is big and dangerous, and there's nothing subtle about him in that. He's not concealed. You're just waiting for the gunfight to start in that. It's when the gunslinger walks into the saloon and you can feel tension because you're waiting for something to go wrong. It's not really a horror technique, but it still affects the audience. And it works. When Sarah Connor's lying on the ground and the Terminator is reloading really quickly, and you get the feeling that the editing and the pacing is just right for that, because you feel like he's actually rushing to finish her off. In Halloween 2, in the basement scene, it's the fact that he's in full view and not dangerous. He's not threatening enough. I'm not saying that they'll be forced to put Michael back into the shadows, because it's entirely possible to have creatures in plain sight as long as they're dangerous, as long as their intent isn't hampered by bad writing. This is a crime that James Cameron commits in Aliens. Newt is cocooned, right? She's plastered to the wall, and the alien for some reason slows down. And what happens in Alien with Kane? Facehugger shoots out of the egg onto his face and burns a hole through his helmet as quickly as possible, and that's why the scene works. The creature is dangerous. The speed is of the essence in those scenes. You don't want to be too quick. In Halloween 2, there's a killing scene very early on in the movie where Myers kills someone so quickly that you don't have time to see it. So it's a question of keeping the monster hidden long enough that you know it's there, and then having that moment where it actually strikes. That's one approach. Or you can have the monster in full view, it's plenty dangerous, and you're still waiting for something to happen. You give the audience enough time to actually feel tension. If not terror, then tension or suspense, something. You have to build up a reaction. So when you burst the bubble, there's actually something there to burst. Tension and release. And there are different ways that you can go about that. But just because you know exactly what a creature looks like doesn't bar them from using old techniques in new movies. People say Cameron's Aliens is an action movie, ergo it doesn't have any elements of horror in it, and that's just not true. If you watch his earlier movies, Terminator, Aliens, Terminator 2, there are some pretty scary scenes in those movies. The T-1000 is pretty scary. when it's killing people. It's literally a slasher, a man with knives for arms. The way that it kills its victims is actually pretty horrible. There's this feeling that the creature is everywhere when the man walks over it, and it's actually the floor that he's walking on. Nowhere is safe. There's nowhere to hide because it's literally the surroundings itself. Plenty of movies and horror franchises will put the killer back into the shadows. In Halloween, with this kind of movie where it's all about showing and hiding the monster, you can't assume that it's a one-trick attack when it comes to Michael Myers. Given his history, given what he's capable of, and all the different ways that they can present him on screen, my optimistic predictions for Halloween 2018 is that they'll use a combination of techniques. They'll keep Michael hidden, they'll have certain scenes where he's in full view, certain scenes where he isn't, and they're able to build up a feeling of tension or suspense. They'll be able to terrify us and horrify us, because it's not just one or the other. A lot of good horror films include elements of both. Even something slow like The Witch, where much of the movie is uneventful, you have scenes of horror and terror. It's going to be the same idea with Halloween, where you have Michael and he picks up the hammer and he clubs the woman to death with it. Does that set the tone for the rest of the film? Well, watch No Country for Old Men. The first 5 minutes of that movie, do they really set the tone for the rest of the film in terms of what you're going to see? No, they don't, because after those two really, really violent moments where he kills the cop and where he kills the old man, those scenes are kind of unique. At least in the first 2 acts, there really isn't a lot of violence like that. The rest of it is mostly just sitting and waiting and talking. The movie switches gears. It's a safer bet to assume that this movie might open the same way that Halloween 2 did in 1981, but that they're going to switch gears. And they're only showing you just enough to kind of give you a taste of what they have without tipping their hand. And if they're not tipping their hand, and if they have more to hide and more tricks up their sleeve, then it's very possible that they might use some of the terrifying techniques as opposed to just having Michael up front and center. They'll use a combination, even if it's not in the trailer. Trailers generally don't give everything away. I know in this day and age people think that they do, but oftentimes that's because you're dealing with films that have a very limited repertoire. If you're watching a Marvel film, in terms of action, what you see is what you get in a trailer, because it's all just in front of you. It's all punching. Superheroes dressed in capes and they're beating each other up. So when you see that in the trailer, that's all you get, because that's all that the movie has. But Halloween has a much larger arsenal of trickery by which to terrify and horrify the audience. And I'm convinced that given all the nods that they have to all of the movies besides just the first one, that they're not just trying to remake Halloween 2, but that they're going to be paying homage to the first film, which in and of itself kept Michael hidden and in plain sight in different scenes. So that's my prediction for what it's worth. If you like this video, leave a like or a comment in the comment section below. If you want to see more of my content, make sure not only to subscribe, but to hit the bell so that you receive all notifications for all videos that I release. Also, if you want to support my content, there will be a link to my Patreon in the description for the video below. Thanks, guys.